Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Shani Drake, and I am the Director of Public Engagement and Marketing at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the first program and talkback related to the Voice to the Voiceless Virtual Film Festival. The Voice to the Voiceless Virtual Film Festival will be held every other week throughout the summer and feature films that deal with issues around civil and human rights. As part of the campaign for equal dignity, all of these films focus on tenets of the campaign in some way. If you join the campaign or need to be refamiliarized, the tenets include economic stability, health security, the right to vote, justice for all, and access to a quality education. This evening, we are hosting a talkback with Roee Messinger, director of the film American Trial, the Eric Garner story. This film goes right to the heart of the Equal Dignity Campaign tenet of justice for all. American Trial is a hybrid fiction documentary that engaged the services of two actual legal teams to create a rigorous, legally based fictional, yet unscripted trial that never happened for one of the nation's most disturbing tragedies, the death of Eric Garner. With us this evening, we have Roee Messinger, director of American Trial. Roee is a New York-based filmmaker and film teacher. He was born in Israel, raised in Mexico, and educated in the United States. Since graduating from City College's MFA program under the sponsorship of the prestigious Fulbright Fellowship for International Students, he has worked for a number of education organizations around New York City, including the Educational Video Center, Lincoln Film Society, and Young Audiences of New York. American Trial, the Eric Garner story, is Roee's first feature film. With us, we also have the CEO and president of the center, Jill Savitt. Jill and I are going to have a conversation with Roee about the film, and I'll go ahead and kick us off. So first, welcome, Roee. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. We are pleased to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we're just going to dive right in. Tell us why you wanted to tell this story and what resonated with you about Eric Garner's life, his story, and his tragic death.
So I was a film student in New York when Eric Garner was killed back in 2015. I was living in Harlem and attending City College. And I'd only been in the United States for about a year when Eric was killed. And, it was just like a punch to the stomach. It was something that everyone around me was talking about. There were rallies. I used to live just 10 blocks from where Reverend Sharpton has his rallies every Saturday. When you walk down the street, when I was walking my dog, when I was at the grocery store, it's all everyone could talk about. And then a few months later, when the grand jury decided not to prosecute the police officer, that was just like a slap in the face after you got punched in the stomach. It made me do some learning. It made me, I remember that as a 6-year-old, I think as a 6-year-old, I remember the Rodney King riot. But it was very different. Obviously, it was very different being a 6-year-old, but also it was very different to be, at the time I was living in Israel. It was very different to watch something on the news that you're told is, something that's happening far, far away, as opposed to being in New York City when something like that is going on. And it just made me think about how everyone was talking about the fact that there wasn't a trial, that there should have been a trial. How is it possible that there's not going to be a trial? And it just occurred to me that I live in New York, that all the people who would have testified in this trial are probably within a 15 or 20 miles radius of me. It's probably not very difficult to find who they are. I thought, I'll give it a shot, see if they'd be interested in participating in something like this. And they were. And that's how this movie was born.
Wow, that's incredible. So Eric Garner's case was an impetus for mass demonstrations across the country, and this was just 6 years ago. And this year, we've seen the deaths of Black women and men, including Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and these deaths have sparked mass demonstrations once again against police brutality and racial violence in this country. What does it mean for your film to arrive at this moment when protesters across the country are once again fighting against police brutality, injustices, and racism?
That's obviously a question that I get asked a lot. And before I answer, I think there's an important point to emphasize, and that is that these, honestly, it's not even these three. It's not Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor as much as it's George Floyd, because of the fact that there's a video that sparked these demonstrations. But it's not like Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd are the first Black people to be killed by police since Esa Garner. And what I always tell people when they ask me that question is that whenever I was doing a Q&A, because the film, the film premiered, at the New York Film Festival in 2019, and I've gone to an event, to events at the Museum of the Moving Image when there was a rough cut, and I had, events where we, fundraisers that we had for the film, held for the film when we wanted to raise some more money when we were during production. And in every single step of the way, whenever there was a moment where people were able to ask me about the relevance of this film, I never had to go back more than 2 weeks to come up with another name that was more recent than Esa Garner, right? And so I think that's just an important thing to emphasize, because I think that there's a lot of people who discovered police brutality when George Floyd was killed, and it's good that they discovered it, but that's kind of like, that's the same as Columbus discovering America. America was already here, right? And so that's just a really important point to emphasize. Now, as far as the timing and the fact that these protests really are much more powerful than anything we've seen probably since Esa Garner and Michael Brown in that summer of 2015. I hope that this film is my modest contribution to the conversation, my modest contribution to opening people's eyes to realizing that police brutality was not invented in the summer of 2020. And that people, just start asking themselves some serious questions that they ought to ask themselves.
Just to follow up on that, when you saw the footage of George Floyd and the "I Can't Breathe," and it plays such a large role in the film, what was your reaction to that?
I was heartbroken. I mean, I'm probably the person who's watched I don't think there's anyone on earth who's watched the Garner video more times than I have. Because when you're making a movie, you need to, you're sitting in the editing room and you're deciding, obviously that video is important evidence, and it's featured in the film several times. And every time it's featured, I needed to watch it, and I needed to think of, am I keeping it for this long? Am I putting it in the right place? Am I using it too much? Am I using it too little? And as a filmmaker, I've probably watched my film, I don't even know how many times. So I've probably watched the Garner video from start to finish, probably thousands of times. And it never got any easier. I never grew a thicker skin to it or anything like that. And with George Floyd, it was just unbelievable to watch it again and realize that 6 years have passed and it's exactly the same.
Yeah, that was definitely something that you immediately catch on to with this film. And in this moment that we're in, it's just this declaration of "I can't breathe," and how, even though we've seen these mass demonstrations 6 years ago, we're seeing the exact same thing under similar circumstances. And it really is heartbreaking to witness that. But at the end of your film, particularly, we see Esa Snipes Garner, Eric Garner's wife, just break down emotionally, feeling and exclaiming like she finally felt she was able to mourn and cry and have a moment to just feel everything that went along with this devastating incident that has happened to her. She lost her husband of 26 years, her children's father, and we see her just let go for a moment at the end of your film. What was it like working with Esa, Mr. Garner's wife, on this film? And then seeing that moment where she has almost a cathartic moment at the end, going through this entire process of creating this film with you?
Working with Esa, was probably the most rewarding experience in making this movie. She was the first person that I reached out to back when I had the idea, because it was very clear that this kind of movie requires the participation, the consent, the endorsement, the enthusiasm of the family, and that without all of that, this kind of film could never come to be. And so we met at the 1-year anniversary rally of Garner's death. I pitched her the idea. She said it was interesting. And then, we spoke on the phone. We had a very long conversation on the phone. And then we met and we talked some more. And within a couple of weeks, she said, yeah, I want to do it. Let's do it. And we've become very close. And it's not something that I expected. We come from such different backgrounds. Where she's about 20 years older than I am. I grew up very privileged on the other side of the world. Esa has, lost a husband. She's lost 2 children. So far, at the age of 34, the biggest loss I've experienced is when my dog died a couple of years ago. And while that was very sad, we've had very, very different life experiences. And so it was such a rewarding surprise to become so close and so intimate. We talk, a couple of times a month, even now when the film is done and there's no work to be made. And as far as that moment that you're referring to, I do think that the film gave her a chance to, I don't want to use the word closure, because I don't think there is closure. But I think you said the word catharsis. So I think you definitely gave her some catharsis, at least in that moment. I think it gave her the ability to talk about it, and be able to say what she feels and what she thinks, and give her also give her a voice, give her a chance to speak her mind. And she's a very opinionated woman, and it's good to hear what she has to say, and it's good for her to be heard. And yeah, I agree. It's the most powerful moment in the film. That's why I chose to end the film with it. I hope that people, when they walk away from the film, are left with, the real, all these names that we hear on the news are real people that have a family that misses them.
Yeah, I was profoundly moved by her, and just this notion that she was keeping it all together throughout this whole thing, that she had to have a hardness about her to face all of this, and then you just see it fall away. I want to ask you about the case itself. So knowing that it was made with the family involved, I think I, clicked the link to watch it thinking that it was going to be so obvious what the outcome of the trial would be, that it would, of course, but you go to such lengths that, and each lawyer that got up you were persuaded by, in terms of the technical matters of the case. Is it a chokehold? Is it not a chokehold? And what it did for me was, at some point, you lose sight of the fact that the guy was selling loose cigarettes. You know, there's all this legal technical. So, and that's, he got murdered for selling loose cigarettes on the street, which is just ridiculous. So how did you balance that, the legal technical matters of it versus the larger issue of absolute unfairness? You know, it seems like there's a competition there.
So, and this is something I told Esa in our first meeting. I wasn't out to make a propaganda film for Black Lives Matter. I fully support Black Lives Matter. But I don't think that the movement is served by making a propaganda film that people walk into expecting, somebody to preach to the choir. I told Esa that I think that what would serve the movement best, and that what would make a film that truly honors the memory of her husband, is to make an objective film that people can't criticize for being slanted, that people walk away from, and they can't say, oh, that damn New York liberal and his agenda, and that they walk away from it, and they're forced to deal with the arguments that were made. And then regardless of which argument they found more convincing, depending on, whatever political persuasion they have, or whatever, whichever attorney they found more appealing or whatever, that they are still forced to ask themselves, how is it possible that this trial was fiction? How is it possible that with all that evidence, that all these arguments, that all these technicalities, and all those proceedings that happened in that courtroom, how is it possible that those never happened? And I think that I think is what the most important thing is, that you're left with in the end. That question.
I just want to follow up on that and see if you can give us some insight into, we see this fictional, unscripted trial that, for all intents and purposes, should have happened, even though it did not, and what that looks like. But I think one thing that the end of the film really drives home is the human toll this takes on all of the people who are impacted by the loss of any of these individuals who are, victims of police brutality. And you said you've developed a relationship with Esa. Can you give us some insight into how something like this, an incident like this, where we see Eric Garner being killed, what kind of profound impact that has on the people who are closest to him?
It turns their entire world upside down. I mean, so Esa and Eric had 6 children together. One of them passed away when she was an infant many years ago. But since Eric's death, Eric and Esa's eldest daughter, Erica, well, sorry, she's not the eldest, but the eldest daughter, she's Eric's eldest daughter. Esa had another, there's an older daughter from a previous relationship. But Erica kind of like took the torch of being her father's advocate. And she died from a heart attack a couple of years ago, leaving a baby for her sister to take care of. And there's no doubt in anyone's mind that the pressure of demonstrating and the anger of dealing with what had happened, that without that, she'd still be alive. And so that's the way it impacted Erica. Emerald, her sister, now has, because Erica had a baby and she had an older daughter. So Emerald ended up with 2 children in addition to her own child. So she's now, a mother of 3, a single mother of 3. And she's also now the torchbearer of that, of the family's activism. And she had a very important role in advocating for the Esa Garner law that passed recently in New York, and making chokeholds illegal, making it illegal for the police to use chokeholds. But she's got so many balls in the air. She's got 3 kids. She's got she has a job. She has her activism, and they never asked for that. They never they didn't look for a life of public service or anything like that. They were just normal people living their normal lives, and all of a sudden they're all they're thrown into this whirlwind. And Esa, of course, is had to deal with all of that, and all of a sudden figure out what she's doing with at the time 4 kids who were living at home still in 2014. So it completely throws their world upside down. I think we can all imagine for a second what our lives would be like when if we lost the person closest to us, and that we lose them on live television or on the news, that that we're constantly seeing it, and that every time that something for example when George Floyd was killed, it was immediately all the news channels made a cut the screen too and put George Floyd on the one side and put Esa Garner on the other side, and so she just can't watch the news like a normal person, because if she does, she's gonna watch her husband die all over again. So it's it's incredibly impacting.
Yes. So the depiction of the relationship between the police and the community was pretty stark, and that the community feels a presence, especially communities of color, Black communities feel a presence of harassment, and seek to avoid the police. Can you shed any light about what you learned about the view of the police presence in the Garner's community specifically, and how that translated across the country at all for you?
So, I mean, I want to caveat that in the sense that, I'm not an expert, I'm not a politician, I'm not a policymaker, but I can tell you just in terms of, an observer, that there are an observer, and I also say as a foreigner, because I think that's also important. I think that there are a number of things about the United States that from an international perspective make us think, how is that even possible? How is that even a thing? The United States is an incredible country. The wealth that it has, the entrepreneurship of its people, the strength and the solidarity of its people, all of that, there's no question. It's an incredibly special place, an incredibly special nation. But there really are a few things like guns, police, healthcare that are just done so differently than any other country in the world that we consider civilized. That really just kind of like makes you wonder how is it possible? How did this system even come to be? And policing in the United States is certainly one of these strange phenomena that really just makes you wonder how is this even possible? There's no other country in the world where people are incarcerated as much as they are in the United States. There's no other country in the world where, again, no civilized country in the world where civilians are killed by the police as often. And yeah, it's sad to say that the policing in the United States is just done in a very, very wrong way. There's no reason why Garner. There was no reason why that encounter should have ended in any type of physical contact. And the fact that it did shows a deep misunderstanding of how communities ought to be policed. Like seriously, that, you know, if you look at Europe, if you look at Israel for that matter, a person selling Lucy's on the street just does not get manhandled by a police officer. It ends with a ticket if anything. And so the fact that that the de-escalation doesn't occur, the fact that that the police are trained to make physical contact like that is just a very severe problem that needs to be addressed quickly.
It's a little deeper than that, which your film shows in very subtle ways. So Esa says how the police would say, "Hey, cigarette man," and taunt him and harass him, and it would get him upset. And she would say, don't do anything, just stay calm. And one of the witnesses, you know, the police are here, I don't go anywhere near them. I mean, you were able to paint a picture through very real people whose lives these are on Bay Street about what this is like. So dropping into that world, had you had any experience before?
No, definitely no. I had no experience before. You know, that was the first time I visited. When I went to meet this eyewitness, that was the first time I had actually gone to Staten Island. I'd never taken the ferry before. I think you're absolutely right. But I think it's part of the same problem. It's you know, that policing is done wrong. That, you know, they don't understand their purpose in the right way. You know, they think that their purpose is to to deal with the bad guys and by any means necessary. And they don't understand that they are a part of the community, that they need the community to be on their side in order to do their work. But these are all very kind of like basic things that police in other parts of the world are aware of it. But truthfully, it just doesn't seem that there needs to be a paradigm shift in the way that police view their role and view their purpose. And I think that the calls for police reform and defunding the police and making sure that the police have funding for the things that they should do and don't have funding for things that they shouldn't do is absolutely the right way of going about it. And there's nothing radical about it. Police shouldn't be dealing with homeless people. Police shouldn't be dealing with mentally ill people. Police should be, police also should be, you know, arresting a person selling Lucy. Police shouldn't draw their pistol as quickly and as easily as they tend to do. Police shouldn't have military equipment. The military equipment that they do. All those things are that people are talking about today. I completely agree with 100%.
How did you come up with the idea to do this hybrid fictional documentary, unscripted? Did you have a model for that? I mean, I had never seen anything like that before. What made you come up with that?
It was really one of those eureka moments. It just, people were talking about, and I was thinking about how it's possible. How is it possible that there was no trial? And then that led to the thought of, oh, what if we made a movie about the trial that never happened? And then the next thought was, if we're already doing that, why not just get the actual people who would have participated in it? So it was really just one of those rare eureka moments where you just have an idea and it happens to be a good one.
Yes, I really, just to Jill's point, I'd never seen anything like that. And I was very intrigued just by the idea of bringing all of these people who could have played that role in their real daily lives and bringing them onto film and then having them non-scripted, which I thought was also fantastic. But with your film, how do you plan to use it to expose, or do you plan to use it to expose police abuse, especially since we are again in this moment where we're seeing mass demonstrations in regards to police brutality and violence? And are you encouraging any actions for your audiences to take as it pertains to police brutality and police violence we've seen against communities of color and Black communities specifically?
So in terms of practicalities, my distributor, Passion River Films, and I are always working on, doing more of these Q&As and doing educational screenings. And we're going to, in August, focus on distributing the films in colleges and law schools and African American history departments and things of that sort. In terms of how do I want to use the film, or how I want the film to be used, I would say that there are certainly people in the film business or in the film industry who are very idealist and consider their role to be I guess a little bit like a journalist, to unearth atrocities and show people the truth and convince them of something and convince them to take action. And behind that, I think that there's this notion that art has the power to change reality. I'm less of an idealist in that sense, and I think that art has the power to mirror reality. It has the power to show you what is true and show you what isn't true. It may even have the power to show you what ought to be true and isn't in this case. But I think that for a film that in and of itself, like without it being part of this kind of panel, or without it being a part of a curriculum at a law school course or something like that, I think the film in and of itself has, the only power that it has is to engage its audience in a way that makes them ask the right question. And that's my hope, that people watch this film and ask themselves, wow, that wasn't real. How is that possible? Why wasn't there a trial? And I also think that the answer to that question, why wasn't there a trial, is really at the heart of all these demonstrations. And the answer to that question is probably where you'd find the solution to a lot of the problems that the United States is currently facing in that sense.
One of the things we focus on at our center, our museum, and our broader institution is on civic participation and urging people to understand the process of civics. And I thought the film was incredible on that front for people who might not understand how a trial works and what all the components are and how the whole adversarial system is meant to operate. Was that deliberate on your part, or just that was what came out? Was that part of the goal of it?
I think the goal was not necessarily that, as much as the goal was to make it accurate, right? So I think that, because we're all used to courtroom dramas as they appear on Law and Order or in Hollywood movies, and there are a lot of differences between the way that the legal system is portrayed in those films and the way it is in reality. I think, most people, I don't think, are aware of how much of an advantage the state has over the person, over the defendant, right? They get to show their case first, and they get to show their case last. And they, for example, right? So in the opening arguments, they get to tell the story first, and in the closing arguments, they get to undo whatever it is that the defense attorney did in their closing arguments, which is an incredible advantage. people also don't realize that how important the jury instructions are. All that's always cut. No one ever shows that. And possibly like the thing I was most worried about in my film, will people have the patience to listen through the jury instructions? But those are really important because the judge tells you what the law is, and you need to deliberate as a juror based on what the law is, and not based on what you saw on TV or based on what the lawyer was, what tie they had, if you liked it or not. And so all those things, the accuracy of it was very, very important to me. And I guess what you're talking about is a result of that accuracy.
Right. Did you ask the people who sat in as jurors, did you ask them how they would have decided the case?
So we shot that trial, the part of the trial was shot in one day, and it was a very, very busy day. And when we wrapped, everybody just wanted to go home because it was a very long day. But I do know that during lunch, they started to, the jurors were just, we didn't have them in a separate room or anything, but they just kind of like huddled up together and started asking each other, well, how'd you vote? And it was at that moment of the day when the trial had been halfway through, or maybe a little bit more than halfway through. I don't know how many votes were for each side, but I do know that it was a hung jury. I know that it was a hung jury. People didn't make up their minds in unison, at least not yet. I also know for a fact that, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I also know for a fact that one of the jurors was a friend of the defense attorney, and he's a former police officer himself. So I don't think that jury would have given us a guilty verdict, but also that jury would never have existed because that guy would have never been called for this kind of jury. But that's to answer your question.
And can you tell us why we're left without a decision? Creatively, what was the impetus behind not allowing that jury to render a verdict in this case?
Right. So the answer is very simple. The moment that I decided to make the film this way, meaning not write a script, the film stopped being my version of the trial as I thought it should be, right? Because if I write a script, I just put words into people's mouths, and then I give a verdict, and it's Roee Messinger's verdict. That's what Roee Messinger thinks should have happened. But the moment I don't write a script and put the players on the board, put the pieces on the board, and let the game play out, it no longer becomes my version. It becomes a possible version, or maybe even what could have really happened. And I think that's the power of the film. But then once I give a verdict, it becomes my verdict again. And so that's why I decided to leave it up to the audience to decide. And I think also the actual verdict isn't as important as the question of why wasn't there a trial. And I think that I would much prefer people leaving the theater or this virtual screening asking themselves, wow, all that evidence and there was never a trial, as opposed to, what did you think of the verdict? Was he guilty? Was he not guilty? I'm sure people will still talk about it and ask themselves, and that will be part of the conversation. But it's really about the fact that this trial never happened. That I think is a more interesting question and a more important question.
Yeah, the lawyers were phenomenal. I mean, the
lawyers were great.
They were just unbelievably persuasive. And each time one side got up, I thought, wow, how are they going to counter that? That's so persuasive. And then the next team got up. Did they treated it like its own case? Did you do any looking over their notes or their questions? Did you shape that at all?
Yes. So there was a lot of work going into this. So we filmed it in one day, but the preparation was very, very long and arduous. Basically, we came up with the main arguments together. And then based on those arguments, they told me what witnesses I needed to find for them. And then once we found the witnesses, I edited their questions so that they would fit into a feature film, because a lot of times in a real courtroom, a witness will, an eyewitness in a case like this would be on the stand for 3 days maybe. But we didn't have, well, first of all, we didn't have 3 days, but also there's, screen time is important. They had 12 minutes with each lawyer had 12 minutes with each witness. And so my work was basically to cut down questions, repetitive questions, or questions that I found less relevant, or things that I figured the audience would work out on their own without the witness or the attorney saying it explicitly.
Interesting.
So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you give us some insight into what you view as the responsibility of creatives, including filmmakers, to address issues of police brutality and racism?
Sure. I think, first of all, that's a very, very difficult question, because I think that responsibility and art, and this is just, my opinion. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who would disagree, but I think that responsibility and art are a little bit like oil and water, in the sense that, an artist needs to have the freedom to tell a story, or to paint a painting, or to write a poem, without having to censor themselves based on social norms, or what people will say, or what people will think. And I think that we're living in a time where that notion is very unpopular. I think that a lot of people would disagree with me, and I think a lot of people would say that artists have a responsibility to serve, the right ideals, and to serve progressive ideals. But I think that if there's any responsibility that, again, this is my opinion, if there's any responsibility that artists have, is to push the envelope, and to go against the stream if the stream is a little too much in unison, and to challenge people's preconceived notions, but also they don't have to. I think that if an artist wants to paint, if a painter wants to paint a bouquet of roses, and that's, it's their prerogative. So I'm personally, I would say, uncomfortable with the I don't know if uncomfortable is a strong word, but personally, I don't consider myself as having a responsibility as a storyteller. But that also means that if I make a film that upsets people, or that hurts people, then it's my burden to bear.
Did the family have any expectation about the film and what would happen after, or how it would be utilized by others? Did they voice any of that?
Right. Just to also mention this in regards to Shani's previous questions, I did feel a very, very deep responsibility to the family, because we are, the film wouldn't exist without them. We are made of stories. The stories that make up our identity are really who we are, much more than the 80% of water or carb in our body. We are story-based life forms. And Esa gave me her story for safekeeping. And so I definitely felt still do feel a very strong responsibility toward her. I was very upfront with her about the fact that I was not going to do a propaganda piece, and that it's going to be objective, and that it's very possible that some people are going to come out and say, no, he's not guilty. As I'm sure some people who watch the film might reach that conclusion. Most don't, because we've done some screenings where people got to vote on the verdict, and the results were always overwhelmingly in favor of convicting the police officer, but certainly it wasn't 100%. And in terms of their expectation, I think that Esa's expectation was that I would make a film that would honor the memory of her husband. And I, from what she's told me, she's happy with it, which makes me very pleased. Because that was a very grave responsibility to take on.
I'll ask one question. The Brazilian martial arts guy? What put that in your mind to have him? I mean, he was such a character.
Yeah, it wasn't my idea. It was the defense attorneys needed a use of force expert. And Robert, one of the defense attorneys, does Brazilian jiu-jitsu with this guy. And he said, "Oh, I know this guy. I know a guy, and they know each other from the time that they were both serving in the police." And he said, "Yeah, so I'm sure he'll want to do it." And it's the witness that he asked for. He definitely looks like he's like someone from like the cast of The Sopranos or something like that. But yeah, that's the story. But that's the story there.
So, can you tell us what you hope people walk away with after they have watched your film?
Yeah. So, like I said before, I think that the what's at the heart of the demonstrations that we're seeing now, and what's at the heart of the problem is the fact that systemic racism in the United States is alive and well. And I think that the reason why there was no trial is because systemic racism in the United States is alive and well. And there's no doubt in my mind that if Esa Garner had been a white man, he wouldn't have been touched by the police. If he had been touched by the police, he wouldn't have been choked by the police. And if he had been choked by the police, that police officer would have been held accountable. And the reason all of that happened is because he was Black. And so I think it's incredibly important for people to watch this film and ask themselves, how is it possible that this trial didn't occur? And I feel like that if they ask themselves that question, systemic racism is the only answer, the only plausible answer that they could arrive at. And if a person who has not given it much thought before reaches that conclusion and walks away from the film saying, "Oh, this guy was killed by the police officer was never tried, and the reason why that happened is because of systemic racism," I think that's an incredible change in the mind of a person who's watched the film. And so my true hope is that people walk away from it and ask themselves, wow, we've watched all this evidence, we've heard all these lawyers, we've heard all these arguments. How is it possible that this never actually happened? How is it possible that someone had to orchestrate all of this together, raise money to get all these people in a room together and the cameras there? How is it possible that this didn't happen by itself in reality?
Well, Roee, thank you so much. We truly appreciate you being here today. We want to let the audience know if you have any questions, please go ahead and place them in the chat. And we are more than happy to ask Roee any questions that you have. But we want to thank you for the time you spent with us today. And
my absolute pleasure.
And for your film, it was really incredible. If you have not viewed it yet, please do so. It really is a fascinating look into what could have been, but also what should have happened. So we are especially grateful for you being here today. Just a few announcements and updates. Of course, this Voice to the Voiceless Virtual Film Festival is part of the Campaign for Equal Dignity. So if you have not yet joined the campaign, you can go to our website, equaldignity.org. We encourage everyone to sign the pledge and to get involved. Each week, we send out a weekly action checklist to everyone who joins our list, our subscriber list. And that checklist has actions that you can take in your own community, in your own home, so that you can help realize equal dignity for all people in this country. And so again, if you sign up at equaldignity.org, you can get that weekly action checklist as well as sign that pledge. Upcoming programming that we have programming every week. So this Friday, we have a program about eviction, the crisis at the core of economic instability, and how being in this moment, especially in the midst of a global pandemic, will exacerbate the eviction crisis that is occurring in the United States. August 16th, there's an equitable dinner that you can attend, so please sign up for that at 5 p.m. And on August 21st, we have a program entitled Educational Disparities and the Unequal Burden, talking about racial disparities in education, and once again, overlaying how being in the midst of a global pandemic complicates an already complicated subject with those educational disparities throughout the country. So our next film that we will be debuting as a part of the Voice to the Voiceless Virtual Film Festival is Rigged, which talks about voter suppression, gerrymandering, and how these voter suppression tactics have real impacts across the country. So the panel for that screening will be August 19th at 7 p.m. We encourage you to screen the film prior to that program. And we're closing out our film festival with John Lewis Good Trouble, and we will be honoring the life of Congressman Lewis and talking about his particular brand of Good Trouble on September 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern. So we hope you will join us then as well. So thank you so much. Again, Roee, thank you. Jill, thank you. And thank everyone for joining us this evening. Go ahead and sign that pledge at equaldignity.org, and we look forward to seeing you at our next program. So have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.